This will be a quick video on how I transplanted my Jiro Fuyu Persimmon tree, and I'm also going to talk about some issues that I've had with some of the fruit trees that I purchased from certain nurseries. Uh, Before I get started, I'd like to point out that this tree is a deciduous tree, which means sometime around winter it goes dormant, and that's the best time to plant these, or in my case, repot. But we're in spring now, and winter's a long way off, so I don't want to wait until then. And in a few, I'll show you why. Before I show you how I actually repotted this tree, I'll show you where it's gonna be planted eventually, and it's gonna be over here in this spot here. Initially, there were 3 persimmon trees that were planted in this area a little over 3 years ago. The one that used to be in the front was a coffee cake persimmon, and on the back right side there was a chocolate persimmon. As I mentioned in one of my previously uploaded videos, this last winter I lost a few trees due to the abnormally cold weather we experienced in my area. The 2 persimmons that were here, I believe, died due to cold damage. This other one over here is the only one that survived. It's a bit hardier. It's a Jiro Fuyu Persimmon, and it did well. I also believe that the pH in my soil may have been a contributing factor as to why I lost some of these trees. Recently, I went around and checked the pH on the soil throughout most of my yards and even the container grown fruit trees, and I found that it was all the way up to 7. I checked the water coming out of the garden hose, and it's also at 7. I've been here on this property for about 8 years now, and when I initially moved in, if memory serves me right, the pH level coming out of the garden hose back then was 6.5, and my trees seemed to do better back then, especially during the winter months. It seemed like they were able to tolerate the cold weather a lot easier. And although it was colder this winter, I believe part of the reason that I lost some of the trees was they, at a pH of 7, they may not have been able to uptake all of the nutrients that they need, enough to store enough energy to survive the winter months. So I think that may have been a contributing factor. Since then, I've gone ahead and I put some soil acidifier throughout my yard and all the container grown trees, trying to lower the pH. I want to get it down to somewhere around 6 to 6.5. I'm also starting to use a garden hose fertilizer bottle. I purchased some liquid soil acidifier, and I'm going to go ahead and put it inside the bottle whenever I do the watering. I tested it on a gallon container, and the pH drops down to about 6. So I'm going to try that for a few months just to see if I can get these trees to start doing a little better. Okay, so getting back to the persimmon, eventually I'm going to plant the persimmon that I showed you at the beginning of the video in this area here. I'm not going to do that right away. If you've been following my channel, you know that most of my trees, like these persimmons, are planted using a technique called high density planting. It's basically a technique where you plant certain trees that are of the same family or similar space close to one another. So you wind up planting 2 or 3 trees that would otherwise be planted all together, otherwise in an area where you would only put one. For me, this technique works especially well because I have a relatively small backyard. But one of the downsides of planting the trees this close together is what I'm now facing, and that is trying to replace a tree that failed, or in my case, 2 that failed. So now in order to replant the tree, I'll have to do my best to remove as many of the old dead roots as possible without disturbing the root system on the surviving tree that's planted in this group. And as you can see, this surviving persimmon tree is in its flowering cycle, and that's the reason why I'm going to put the new persimmon in the ground probably next season. I don't want to disturb the fruiting cycle this season on this one here, so I'm going to go ahead and wait before I transplant it. And if you're wondering why I'm repotting the new persimmon now instead of just waiting for winter in order to put it in the ground for next season, here's the reason. Here in this short video shows you exactly what I'm talking about. After bringing my new tree home, I decided to see how the tree had been potted at the nursery, so I dug down in order to see just how far the root ball was. As you can see from here, it was almost all the way down, the root ball was almost all the way down 6 inches deep. At that depth, there's no chance for any airflow reaching the root flare, which is a good practice for maintaining a healthy fruit tree. From research I've done, it's best to have the crown of the root ball slightly exposed, where it's planted in a manner that it's sitting just above ground level. And also, some trees will establish a shallow root system. When a tree trunk is buried this deep, it's going to be difficult for the tree to establish a shallow root system. Here's another video that shows the shallow root system that I'm talking about. This is an orange tree that was already on the property when I moved in. In the past 8 years since I've been here, this tree has never really produced much of a crop. I recently got around to clearing out the lava rock around the tree, and I found some plastic landscape ground cover. After removing the plastic, I could see the shallow root system, and if you look closely, you can see all kinds of roots that have developed up here closer to the surface. I don't think this tree was doing very well because of the ground cover that was keeping water from getting to some of these roots, or at least not enough water was going through anyways. It was a pretty thick ground cover that was placed on here. So now getting back to how the nursery potted this persimmon, this tree was buried way too deep. Here is all the extra soil that I removed. The soil that they used wasn't too bad and actually had some worms in it. But burying the root ball as deep as they did, they wound up covering all these shallow roots, which were likely established when the tree was in a smaller pot. And here you can see how this root was growing upwards towards the surface rather than down. This is a fairly thick root and it should be going downward, but because the nursery potted the tree deep, covering all of these shallow roots, the tree was struggling, so it began to grow some roots upward. And I'm no expert by any means, but I really don't think this is a good practice. This is to say that I don't think a tree should be planted with the root ball buried as deep as this one was. I decided to transplant my tree to this 15-gallon grow bag. As I do with all my container grown trees, I line the bottom with lava rock, or in this case I use some volcanic rock. It works just as well. And then on top of that I added a layer of sand just to help improve the drainage. Here's the soil that I used. I'll list the contents of all the mix I used on the screen. I filled the grow bag with the soil I had prepared and then placed the tree on top. I made sure to put it in a manner that the root ball was slightly exposed, and then I put the remainder of the dirt all around and packed it in a little bit. After filling in the dirt, I cut a small piece of wire mesh, as you can see here. I placed it on the bottom of the tree trunk and tied it together with some zip ties. I then filled the inside of the circle with some lava rock. And then I added some wood chips around that. Here's what it looked like when I was done. I'd like to point out that putting the lava rock around the trunk of the tree, the only reason I do that is for better airflow and also to keep the wood chips away from the trunk. So as they break down, there's no chance of any disease or anything spreading onto the top of the root ball or the trunk. It's just something that I do to help improve, mostly to help improve the airflow. And there is one step that I skipped on this one. I usually sprinkle some, when I'm transplanting any of my trees, I usually sprinkle some mycorrhiza on any exposed roots and also on top of the root ball. I didn't have any mycorrhiza on hand, so I had to skip it, but what I'm going to wind up doing is as soon as I get some, I'll just sprinkle it up on top near where the rocks are and just water it in. Hopefully this will help the tree put on some good growth during the time it's going to be in this container, which is going to be for at least one more season. So hopefully by next year, by the time I get ready to put it in the tree, it'll be a little bit bigger than what you see now. Okay, before I end this video, I'd like to show you two additions to my backyard orchard. This one here is a Abiu, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And according to nursery info, it's supposed to do well in zones 10 and 11 if planted in the ground. And the second tree is called an achacha. And according to nursery info on this one, it's supposed to do well if planted in the ground in zones 9 through 11. I haven't found too much information on these as far as any other gardeners in California that are growing these and getting them to fruit. I have seen some videos where they have them planted and they are doing well. They do survive our winters here, and our climate seems to be favorable for them, but I haven't found any videos where I've actually seen someone in my zone or something close to 10A that has actually got these to fruit. So I know I've seen plenty of videos from people growing them in Florida, and they seem to thrive over there, but I'm not sure about our climate here, if they're gonna, in Southern California, if I'm gonna be able to get them to fruit. But I'll I'll keep you posted on their progress. And I won't be planting these in the ground anytime real soon. I'll repot them into grow bags and see how they do for at least another season. By next season, if I see that they're doing well in our climate, I'll go ahead and put them in the ground. Well, that will be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. If so, don't forget to click on that like button, and if you're not already a subscriber, please click on the subscribe button so you can follow along. Until next time, as always, stay safe, grow your own, and thank you for watching.